crazy. I'm I'm excited. You think that was better? Pull it out this way and I'll move this. Libby, by any chance, do we have an extension cord?
Sure, I'll ask. And the ladies' room is right on the other side of this wall.
Thank you.
Lee, do you have an extension cord you can use?
How long does it need to be?
Take it from there to there.
Got a few power strips.
Thank you.
Did you know I was behind the year before?
I knew that at one point.
So this is where I'm gonna be in charge of?
Let me make sure my
Yep.
volume is turned all the way off, please.
You got it set like you want it?
Not quite yet, but we're working on it.
Okay. We don't need to rearrange anything, everything is,
No, I don't
Okay.
think so.
alright, there you go. Now this,
Thank you.
that plug over there don't work, so everything's gonna have to be plugged over here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's a plug back here behind this computer
Okay.
up there at the top.
Y'all need to get an electrician in here for it. Put in a work order, sir.
That one, and there's this one.
Would you like to have a name tag?
Sure.
Okay, and how
And
about
this
your
is-
daughter?
Caitlin, is that what you wanted to write? Sure. It's
What's your-
Caitlyn.
Mulcher?
Keplinger.
I'll just put the K in there. I'm Libby Jones, my husband is Steve Kelly, and it makes endless confusion there.
Sometimes. Very much the back. And then I think sometimes things turn on and then they're running.
It's such a good encounter. I put a dish in your refrigerator. Spaghetti casserole. So I hadn't, I thought I called her to thank her. So I said, I'm not gonna eat it tonight. I thought I was here back. Go Jack, and call a salad. I do that a lot. Candy.
And that time, couple of weeks, I'm having you have no place on this that worried her.
I don't know why that doesn't happen all the time.
It's amazing that it hasn't. Because Mary J. goes over and finds it all that.
I know. That's
I couldn't see her face. She was just more like, it's all good. How you doing? It's a lot. Whenever you're ready.
Me and Brian comments.
I have almost time. She'll wait for a minute or two. Okay. I'm a school teacher, so I started at 11 o'clock on the dot. Well, we welcome you here today. Thank you so much for coming in this unusual situation. Our last full meeting was in April of 2019. And Sherry Todd Mulcher came to that meeting. She was invited by Marvin Jones. And he talked about the free people of color of the Winton Triangle and Civil War history at that time. We welcome you not only to this meeting, but it would be wonderful if you could join us. If you enjoy this program today, we need your support. We have ongoing projects. Come on in. This is a cousin of mine, they're always late.
I come early, you're in my house.
Joneses just don't show up on time.
Excuse me?
There's another Jones back there who's on time.
Yes.
In December of 2020, Winton became part of the National Register of Historic Places. So we have a historic district in place now with the available tax credits, both federal and state, for rehabilitation of homes. And we hope to be able to start meeting with property owners in the spring to the summertime as things start to clear up infection-wise, so that we could have larger meetings at that time. I'd like to remind you to make sure your cell phones are turned off before the meeting starts. Let me introduce you to Sherry Todd Mulcher, who's been with us before, several years ago. She's from, come on in, Gail. Thank you, all right. And I have to credit Gail with reminding me that this was the 165th anniversary of the burning of Winton, so she got this all moving forward. All right. Sherry works with the Civil War and Reconstruction History Center, and I'm going to let her share with you what her work is like there and the purpose of the center. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Sherry, and I am the Content Development Specialist at the History Center. We are not brick and mortar, and I've been working for them since 2016. We're hoping to open in 2024 and break ground. Everything is a go for that part. It is a free-phase project, and because I knew about the 106th anniversary of the burning of Winton, what I've done today is I'm going to be talking a little bit about the History Center, more about the 100 Stories from 100 Counties project, which is what I primarily work on, and then I'm going to be sharing some of the information that's come to us from those stories about your home, Winton. So that's what we're doing. It will be affiliated with the Museum of the Cape Fear. It's going to be a state-run museum, and it's going to be located in Fayetteville, right by the Arsenal Park. I don't know if you are familiar with Fayetteville, but their arsenal grounds are there, and that's where Sherman came through and burned everything down in March of '65, and the ruins remain part of the foundation. And so on that site is where this History Center will be built. It's not going to be like other places. It's not going to be artifact driven. It's going to be story driven. And it's going to cover, from the mountains to the coast. So as far as North Carolina stories are concerned. And make sure that we talk about all the diversity that was here at that particular time. Now that brings me to the story project, the 100 Stories from 100 Counties. We accept anything that's based on oral tradition. With oral traditions, I simply make sure it says 1862 instead of 1962, and I try to make sure it's legible, that people could read it. The dialect is preserved. It goes up with oral tradition across the top in the archive. Stuff based on genealogical research, I vet and edit, and if everything turns out just as it is, then it goes up as it is. If I find something a little different, I give you those records, and then the final say is the submitters as to whether or not it gets added to the collection or not. And then with primary resources, I will transcribe letters, journals, diaries, you name it. We always give a modern day transcription, and then the transcription as is based on the actual documents themselves. And then I will look up everybody mentioned. And that part of the story is there too, to try to make sure that there's context to whatever is being given to me. Photographs are always welcome. Now, a lot of things that come to me are military driven. They're the stories about the soldiers. And that's perfectly fine. But it doesn't have to be. I've been given what was then called a receipt. But it was actually a piece of paper where a grandmother wrote to her granddaughter, who had just got married, how to wash clothes. Literally giving her step-by-step instructions on how to wash clothes at that particular time. And it's incredibly different from what my daughter would witness today. And it's sweet. And it goes all the way through the whole process, right down to having a cup of tea on the porch and waiting for your man to come home. So, yeah. It is not just about the military. It is home front stories as well. And then, of course, women were nurses and women followed men out there. So the stories are diverse. We had a lot of men who fought for the Union in North Carolina, particularly in the western parts of the state. And their stories are just as relevant. And then, of course, we have all of the groups that don't always have a lot of space in the history book, and we want to try to make sure that we get those stories as well. People of color who are free, people who are enslaved, all of the Native American groups, and we had 5 tribes here then. Then we have the Quakers and the Moravians, of course, and their stand on different things. So that is what we're trying to do, is get as many of these stories gathered up as possible. So far, I personally have published 517. So that's what we have right now. The last slide is also this, so I won't take too much time, and my information is on the flyers, but you can submit them either via email on the actual website, email to me directly, or you can mail them to me if it's something that it's a lot. And we'll take anything from, 2 sentences to 40 pages. I think my longest has been about 60, but. Now, I will talk about what I was able to gather from the 5 submissions that we have received from Hartford County thus far about Winton in that particular time. I know that it was a place that the commander in, I'm going to butcher the name. This is where my not being a local hurts me. Murfreesboro?
You got it right.
Okay. Well, the commander was located in Murfreesboro, and he kept telling people that there was at least a 6-month supply in this area, and that they needed to guard it better. This is the Confederate commander. And that wasn't what happened. They only sent 2 units. One was the 1st Battalion of the North Carolina Volunteers, led by Lieutenant Colonel William Williams from Nash County. The other one was Company A from Virginia Mounted Artillery, and that was Captain Nichols, led that group. It was about 700 people, and at the time when they got to Winton, there were about 20 houses here and a population of about 300. Supported mostly by fisheries and traffic and naval stores, which you guys might already know, but it was news to me. And when the 2 units of soldiers arrived, they basically took up every single place here. Not all. They did not dwell in all places. But they took up quite a few. And some townspeople actually left when the Confederate soldiers came. Some stayed. But there are notes and diary entries talking about the tensions that are building in February of 1862, because with the Confederate soldiers here, they knew something was going to be happening, so that tension was definitely here. Colonel Williams received word that there were going to be some gunboats coming down the Chowan, am I saying that right, Chowan River? Okay. Chowan, thank you. It's the names that get me. So he decided to prepare an ambush, and he stationed his men on the bluff between Barfield's Landing and Winton, apparently. And that way he could try to ambush the gunboats, shoot them before they could get their guns, because of course they were all packing, and hopefully defer the raid, repel them. In his records, it says he hired Martha Keene, who's a person of color, in her 30s, to go down to the wharf and to signal the Union gunboat in, saying it's safe to come to this area. In the Union side, the records are a little different, but that comes later on a different slide, so I'll tell you about that. There were 8 gunboats. The Delaware was first, then came Commodore Perry, and then 6 more down the line. When they came in view at 4, Miss Keene was down there at the wharf to greet them, waving a piece of material to bring them in. However, up in the cross trees of the Delaware, which this is the Delaware, was Colonel Rush Hawkins. He was the commander of the 9th New York Volunteers. The 4th Rhode Island, there were several companies of the 4th Rhode Island also on these ships, but Colonel Hawkins, was the leader of the 9th New York Volunteers, and he was known to be a bit rash, but he had heard that there were 500 Union sympathizers in Winton, and that they were waiting for them with the flag raised. And so he decided to climb up in the cross trees of the Delaware to make sure that he could see them as they got closer. The Delaware was piloted by a North Carolinian native, and he knew the waters very well, which kind of helped in this whole scenario. This is Colonel Hawkins. About 50 yards from shore, he saw the glint of a reflection from the steel over on the left line, and realized that the Confederates were there. I'm going to read straight from a slide, forgive me, but this is what he wrote. I shouted to the astonished native pilot at the helm, "Ring on, sheer off, rebels on shore," fully half a dozen times before he could comprehend my meaning. They cleared the wharf by 10 feet. They went by Winton, and then they got turned around, and they basically pointed all their gunfire at the bluff. And this is February 19th. Sorry. So this is February 19th, 1862. And they left and then pulled anchor about 6 or 7 miles away from Winton. 2 of the Confederate officers were hurt. None were killed. No one was hurt on the Delaware. And they had 185 bullet holes on the ship. So, we basically met up with all of the 7 other gunboats. Perry did come up behind them, but realized what was going on and was able to navigate back. And so all the naval officers got together that evening on the 19th to say, what are we going to do? And they decided that they were going to come back on the 20th and fight the Confederates who were here. So they prepared for that. They basically had some sort of bulletproof casing that they could put on the boats, and early in the morning on the 20th, around 6 a.m., they got up and they did that. They also put out extra sabers and naval pistols and in piles on the different gunboats so that the crew could grab it and just go. It was an interesting read. And then the Confederates here in Winton were celebrating. They thought they'd done the job, that they had repelled the Union attack, that they weren't going to come back, that they'd crippled the ship, and it was done. So everybody rested very well that night, apparently. And then they were very surprised when they heard that these gunboats were coming back in their direction. Well, Colonel Williams decided that there was no way, with the force that he had, that he could take on a full attack now that they were expecting it. And so he sent his troops to Mount Tabor Church, about 4 miles out on Murfreesboro Road, and left Winton defenseless. Well, of course, the townspeople who were here were absolutely shocked. They tried to gather up their things to leave as soon as possible. In many cases, not all, some stayed. But Mrs. John Anderson, it was said in an oral tradition, she was a wealthy widow, and she had to be placed bodily in a cart laden with valuables by her son, because she refused to leave her wealthy home. She was not leaving her home. So he picked her up bodily, put her in the cart full of valuables, and left. But before she would leave, she had her enslaved individuals wrap her piano with quilts, carry it to the woods, and bury it. This is a sketch called General Foster's Infantry Disembarking at Winton. So this is the morning of the 20th, and around 10:30 a.m., they arrived. Right before that mile between Barfield's Landing, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Barfield's Landing and Winton, they fired the whole way. And then they realized that they weren't being fired back, that no one was firing back on it.
May I ask a question?
Mhm.
And this is for people here, I think. Barfield's Landing, is that Harrodsville or Tunis?
It's Tuscarora.
Tuscarora, I had it all wrong all the way, thank you.
Good to know.
It's a short distance.
Yeah, they said it was about a mile.
Yeah, about right.
Yeah, that's what I read. Well, 6 companies took possession of Winton. They all came in. Several others were sent on missions just to kind of scout and spy and see what was going on out around. And only a few citizens had remained here. Most of them seemed to be people of color. Mrs. Keene was one of those people, and so Colonel Hawkins actually went and spoke to her to talk to her about the fact that she was down at the wharf signaling and that they were safe. She told him, and it was written in his records, that she was a slave of one of the Confederate officers, and the Confederate officer told her that they were going to kill everybody and she needed to do what he said. And so that was actually in his records. And so he had those people who had remained transported to the gunboats for safety. Not 100% sure what happened to them once they were on the gunboats or where he took them, but their story kind of stopped there on me, and I didn't have time to delve deeper. But that was an interesting thing to me. I wasn't sure what he was doing.
It would have gone back down to Edenton, which had been taken by Union troops, and then there were other naval areas where liberated slaves and free people of color who joined the Union were taken. It's like
I know
Plymouth was one of
Newbern
them,
certainly
and
was.
Newbern,
Yeah.
others, yeah.
Okay. Well, Colonel Hawkins decided that he would, look at all of the structures in town to determine which ones had been used by the Confederacy. And then he ordered that any place that had been used for Confederate quarters or storage were to be torched. That included Winton Courthouse, which had been built in 1853 and cost the town $30,000 back then. He acknowledged that the burning did not go as he had planned because more was burned than what should have been. Apparently the old Franklin Hotel building and the Anderson home, for Mrs. Anderson, were also burned down, even though they did not have anything to do with Confederate occupation at the time. So, this is a sketch by Charles H. Bonwin for Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper. It's the ruins of Winton. And by the end of the day on February 20th, 1862, basically the only thing left standing was the Methodist church and a couple of other structures. Everything else was gone. Libby mentioned Marvin's last presentation. Well, he was kind enough to submit that as a story to us for the archive so that we have it in our collection. And these were excerpts from that because he said once the Union gunboats took control of the Chewan River, both whites and people of color, enslaved and free, did flee to the Union lines. Also, there were quite a few men in this area who joined the U.S. colored troops. Their stories are fascinating. I've read quite a few. And then the U.S. Navy as well. So apparently the Union Navy did continue to visit Winton from that point on and controlled the river from that point on in the war. What I was able to read about Colonel Williams, he was reprimanded for leaving. He actually came back and tried to help some of the people who had fled to outskirts and were trying to come back to the place. And so he was here for a little while, but he was reprimanded for leaving because his superiors told him there was no reason for him to go. Also, Hawkins was reviewed for his behavior with burning down the town. He got some good press and some bad press about it. A lot of people in New York, in the New York papers, were saying that he had burnt down the homes with people, in them, right around the people. And he got a reputation as being particularly reckless and insubordinate. It was determined when he went through the process that it was not the wrong thing to do. It was the first place to burn in the Civil War in North Carolina, the first city. A story submission. I have 5 from Hartford County. I would love to have more. So if anyone has any stories that they'd like to share, I would greatly appreciate it, as would the History Center. And as I said, I've always enjoyed working with my story submitters, and it's been a wonderful journey as far as that's concerned. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
No one died in the burning of Winton?
Not according to the records.
question. It said there were 20 homes in Winton and 300.
Yeah, I know. I questioned that too,
20
but
houses.
I would say that maybe they just meant in the town center, and then everybody else was around. I don't know. I noticed that discrepancy as well, but I kept finding it, so it was like, okay, well, I'll just go with it.
The core of Winton started at the river and went to Wynn Street. So it was not on down to Winton Baptist Church or to the Duck Crew or down to C.S. Brown. That growth came much later. 1908, the town was more down toward the Duck Crew at that part, and C.S. Brown was not in the town limits.
But
There
from what I
were,
was,
there were farms
yeah.
on that southern end of town,
Well,
farmland.
And that was not part of the town property.
and from what I was reading, Mrs. John Anderson apparently owned quite a few of the structures that were in town as they existed at that particular time, because her husband had been wealthy and had started things.
Her home was located at the empty lot where, that's across from the Winton Cafe and adjacent to the hair fashion store. There used to be Mrs. P.G. Downs' gas business there. So that's where the Anderson home was, and there were naval stores and warehouses in that area, and then there would have been, maybe not, there were places to house the tar, the pitch, the pine, and then the wharves at Winton, because ships came into this town, docked and unloaded and reloaded.
Apparently Hawkins used tar that was located in the town, because he had his men bring Winton's tar up to the structures to burn them. But,
Okay, because that would have been available for sale here.
And the number of people could be attributed to the fact that families back then were much, much larger.
yes, they
And
were.
multi-generational households.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
it was no big deal to have 10 to 15 children.
Did you all hear
Right.
what Jill said? Large families? Okay,
Talk louder for me.
that's all right, sorry. You did just fine.
Any other questions?
The troops that came in and burned Winton were dishonored, but later went on to serve well for the Union. They were in the battles at Antietam and took horrible losses. About 70% of their men were killed at that time, killed or wounded.
Well, as far as the Delaware was concerned, I kind of followed her history a bit, and she stayed fully active in the Union all throughout the war, and was retired, kind of went off the grid around 1919. So with her 185 bullet holes, she kept going.
So that, you started off the story mentioning the Confederate troops are here to protect stores in Murfreesboro. Did the Union eventually get up there? Because there's earthworks by Mount Tabor Church where the Confederates went across the creek and set up defensive maneuvers. I guess that was maybe their logic, that they couldn't defend Winton, but they could.
I guess that's what Colonel Williams was doing. It was mentioned that the breastworks that you talked about, that was mentioned in the stuff that I read. However, I don't know what Hawkins did right after this. I kind of stopped. I'm sorry.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know exactly where they went on from here. I don't know the answer to that.
We have some Murfreesboro people here that might be able to help.
I'm one of those Murfreesboro people.
Okay.
I do not know how valid this story is, but it involves the Masons, and it's a popular story from Murfreesboro at that time. The largest house in Murfreesboro at that time was Melrose, which was the home of the founder of Murfreesboro. That family was not there by the Civil War, but it was still one of the grander homes. And the story goes that the man who was living there then was a Mason. He was off fighting somewhere else, but he had put his Masonic apron on the grandfather clock. I don't know if this is one of the stories that anybody submitted.
No, I've not
But
received that.
when the Union came to town, they of course wanted to set up in the largest home, and so the story is that the Union officer rode his horse up the front steps of Melrose and into the foyer. The idea eventually that they would burn Murfreesboro too, but when he went into the foyer on horseback and saw the Masonic apron hanging on the grandfather clock, he was a Mason as well, and he decided not to burn Murfreesboro in the spirit of Masonic brotherhood. But the story goes, there was an eagle on the top of the grandfather clock, and sitting on his horse, he reached up and snapped that eagle off, and because the eagle was a Union symbol, and he said, I'll not burn the town, but no rebel home will have an eagle in it. So he stuck it in his pocket and rode on out. I don't know how long they stayed in Murfreesboro, but they didn't burn the town. And as I said, I don't know. My uncle lived in Melrose in the 1960s for 50 years. So he told this story, and all the Masons in town know this story. And we actually reenacted it for Civil War reenactment a few years ago.
That's wonderful.
Several times.
Yes, please, we need to talk.
And I have other stories, so yes, please.
That would be wonderful. Yes, absolutely.
Online, if you go to the North Carolina History Center, you'll see videos of Sherry talking, and in it she said before the pandemic you might get 2 stories a week, and during the pandemic you were getting 2 stories a day.
Well, 6 or 7
6 or
sometimes.
7 a day.
And because I'm a part of 300 genealogical groups, and a lot of it's through social media, and I would get messages and stories at 1 a.m. in the morning sometimes. My furthest away has been from Spain, a gentleman who lives in Spain whose ancestors were here. So, I mean, everybody's dealing with different times and whatnot, so. But yeah, 6 or 7 a day was my max. It settled down to about 2 a day. Right now, it's about 2 a week.
How much accuracy or data do you need when people send you information?
The oral tradition that was just shared could go just as it is. Son of, daughter of, and it's a tree. I have to check that to make sure that it's accurate. I've had people who mixed up, I guess the most was 3 men into 1. And so people make mistakes, it happens. It's easy enough to do when you're dealing with William Smith or, it's easy. So those do need to be accurate. And when it comes to transcriptions, you can transcribe it or I can transcribe it, either one, that doesn't matter. I'll read through it, but does that answer the question? Okay. Yeah. We do try to make sure that what goes up is accurate, and if it's of academic quality, if it will help teachers in classrooms, or if we think that different age groups might engage with it, it goes over to the academic site too. So it's a part of the 100 Stories collection, but then it becomes a part of the New History Observer collection. And those are all footnoted, and I do talk to the submitter about this too, obviously. But all the records I find, all the records that they have, everything's footnoted accurately so that the teachers can just pull up everything and use it in their classroom. And that's happening. That's happening now.
I had a question, which I think maybe one for Libby or somebody. You said the Methodist Church was left standing. Is that the site? Where was the Methodist Church then?
The current, the Heron Native American Church used to be the Methodist Church built in the 1930s. But the Methodist Church before that had existed on the same lot somewhere and had burned on a Sunday. And the Baptist and the Methodist all came together to try to put the fire out. The Sue Felton Woodward thinks that there may have been a Methodist church located on King Street where Shaw, which runs between the old bank building and the Winton Baptist Church, goes back that way. She thought there may have been one in that area where her house was located. So people, just as with the Baptist church in Winton, there were several locations for churches, and churches burned because they were made of wood and the new things were built. So I don't know where the Methodist church was located. But we do still have one building that is reportedly pre-Civil War, and that is the building that stands behind Gray Gables and is labeled as a colonial kitchen. The folks from Historic Preservation say that it looks more like a smokehouse structure to them. So that is the, and that was moved there from another part of town.
Any more questions?
I got one actually.
Uh-huh.
Colonel Hawkins, did you ever write a biography about his Union gunboat flight?
I don't think the name of it. Postal something in North Carolina.
I think I read it. It was in the collection here.
I can look it up for you.
The name just
That's
tweaked my
where-
memory, so I was curious.
Yeah, I do have it. The one thing that's missing from my presentation, and I do apologize, is the source list. Normally, that's there. It got deleted by accident at 7 o'clock yesterday, and I didn't have time to recreate it. So, if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to do that for you. All of the information that I have here, though, did literally come from the 5 stories that we have on our website from Hertford County. I mean, they did all come from that material. I only went out to find pictures. That's the only thing I did. And you provided 2 of the sketches. So, yeah. Yes, sorry.
Just to fill in the story, what I read is that the troops actually went to Weldon, which was a railroad hub in the area, which is about 50 miles west of here by Roanoke Rapids, and then they dismantled railroad ties and did some local destruction to what was the Confederate rail system in Weldon, and that was really one of their goals to dismantle the railroads. So that's part of what, when you said where did they go west, they actually went to Weldon, which is in Halifax County.
I can't read it.
What? Yeah, I think there's even some signs in Weldon, historical signs that talk about the aftermath of the landing in Winton, that they went up. That was their furthest advance west to Weldon. Does anyone else corroborate that? Or,
I know that the Weldon Railroad was a hub connected with the Petersburg
yeah,
Railroad, so
yeah,
that was an important.
railroad hub. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they also wanted to secure the canal blocks up in Virginia, but they didn't quite get there in time. The Confederates were able to sabotage them before they got to it.
Yes, I did read that. Yes. Thank you. Oh,
Could you repeat what Lee said?
that they were going to, do you want to go ahead, Lee?
They were heading up to the, another one of their objectives was the canal blocks leading up into Virginia, but the Confederates were able to sabotage them before they could get there and secure them because they wanted to hold them so they could advance into the back line of the Confederates in Virginia.
And what I read was that they actually put debris and all kinds of different things and like some couple of boats and such and blocked off that area. That was what I had read, why that struck me. Williams was writing about that. Yes.
I've got a fragment of the story I can add on to it. My dad would tell us when we were growing up, there was a house at the end of Mount Moriah Road on the Murfreesboro Road, a 2-story house, and he recalled being told that one of the ladies living there was panicked by the Confederates coming into Winton, got out on the roof and jumped off and broke her leg.
Oh, wow.
But I'm fuzzy on the details of what that family's name was and so on, but that indicates a little more drama to how panicked folks were.
Yes,
May or may not have been.
yes, definitely.
Most of the riverfront property in Hertford County is swampland, and there are a few high points. I've heard, I don't know, sure not, but there are vestiges of gun emplacements at Petty Shore, which is about 5 miles south.
I don't know.
And
I've heard that too.
I'm wondering if the firing that was done on the United States ship was done from Winton or some point south of here.
Well, the ones that I spoke of were the ones that they actually counted the night of the 19th and the morning of the 20th before coming here, and it was recorded in the records. So the 185 bullet holes actually came to the Delaware from their attack on the Winton shores, from what the
Not
officers were
Barfield,
saying.
but here.
Right, yes.
Wesley Liverman has artillery shells or the cannonballs, I don't know. He has some ordnance that they found. I understand, if anybody has heard this story, that they found as they were clearing and working along the riverbanks where he lives, which is just that way, you know. And then King Street, it's over there. So that would serve the story that they were bombarded here
Yes.
on the 19th.
Morning of the 20th. They came back guns a-blazing.
Okay.
They
Alright, the
did,
20th, that's right.
they did try to fire back, but they were like carrot guns, and I'm sorry, I'm not a military historian, so I'm not 100% sure exactly what a carrot gun looks like. But that was what was recorded in the records, that they had fired back at the bluff with carrot guns that were on the ship.
I think they usually tend to be like little swivel guns mounted on the railing, like about like a pound and a half projectile.
That would make sense,
Yes.
yeah. It was a quick response.
But to add to what you were talking about in Petty Shore, there in Charles Hughes' backyard, there is a gun mine. It's getting close to the erosion point, though, it's still there.
When I was a child, and maybe somebody back there that was talking, I feel like Dillard Riddick's house, do you know what I'm talking about? If you went down the prison road and you took the ferry, the whole ferry across, Dillard Riddick's, and I'd always heard it was pre-Civil War. It's still there, but in shambles. It was down near Dockside. If you were coming from the Murfreesboro side that way, if you went across this way, it was there. And I feel like I was taken on a field trip as a teenager, or maybe as a first-year teacher, that there were mounds right there at the river across from that house where people, did you ever have that photo?
I don't recall. Now, my mother did, bring me past Mount Tabor in the 60s and showed me the earthworks on either side of the road and told me that story. And she couldn't, as we went down towards the Riddick house, of course, there were all kinds of stories from that house, because it was supposedly, according to Mrs. Riddick, the teacher, very haunted. But
Had drapes in it from the Civil War.
it was very pre-Civil War.
Right.
And unfortunately, as you said, it's now in shambles.
It was a beautiful house, even as a child. It'd be worth your time to ride by there and try to visualize it. And I think there were hills that, Confederates or tried, because that would have been the right side of the river, I guess.
These stories that you're telling, take this brochure with you, go
Yes,
home,
please.
and write something down and send it to Sherry, because we
Yes.
need to document everything that we've been told is hidden in our memories or working back in there,
Yes.
which is possible.
And Lee, to answer your question, one little citation survived. Coast Operations in North Carolina. That was the book he wrote.
Okay.
Okay.
And it collaborates something somebody said about Halifax County, and that way, my mother was from Woodland and a Quaker, well, her family was Quaker. But there's a place outside of Woodland called Quaker Square, and, her grandmother, great-grandmother lived out there, and she and my grandmother had told me many times about the Yankees coming through, and they would have to take their silverware to the thicket behind the house. So that road makes that collaborates the highway you talked about.
Oh, and the piano that Mrs. Anderson buried is still in existence. The
Is it
Story-
really?
The Story family, Jane Story had it, and after her death, it went on to somebody in her family. So,
Oh, that's amazing.
still exists.
That's amazing.
Got a question from our online audience. Did any Union troops stay in Winton to rebuild? Interested if any descendants from the area that come from the burning aftermath?
Based on the information I've read so far, no. However, I am not a specialist on this particular area of history, obviously. I mean, I just did about 2 weeks worth. So, based on what I read from Hawkins, no. But I don't know for certain.
There were other accounts and diaries written about it, and the men got back on their boats and sailed back down the Chowan toward Edenton.
Well, and
Or they sailed some way, I'm not sure. The river north of here had been blocked off so that the Union ships could not get up into the northern parts of the Chowan and on into the Nottoway and the Blackwater.
There is a diary out there from one of the men of the Rhode Island, one of the companies of Rhode Island, and it sounded like it would be interesting reading. I did not have time to delve into that as much as I would have normally have done that. I could go down rabbit holes very easily. I do love those, so. Yeah. And they're trying to get back on task. So.
Any more questions?
Libby, just think about that topic, blocking off the river. Any idea how they did that? Did it log jams or any idea what they did?
I have read and I don't remember.
They pulled a heavy chain across up there close to where Summerton Creek is. There was a fort up there, Dillon Forest, I believe it was. Anyway, they pulled a heavy chain across the river to block the ship.
Chains and derelict boats usually tend to be what they went to for blocking off waterways.
I do thank you all for coming, and I've really enjoyed reading and learning more about this area as I go. That's the thing about my job I absolutely love. I learn something new every day about different parts of North Carolina. I don't personally have ancestors who lived in the state at that particular time, but it's been an absolute pleasure to get to learn about the people who were there then. So.
Well, thank you for helping us remember the 160th anniversary
It's
of
my
this
pleasure.
event.
Thank you for having me.
You all are welcome to stay a little bit longer and socialize as much as you feel as you can.